It started with a small inconvenience, one of those little things you notice but don't pay much attention to. At first, I assumed it was a coincidence. A random car tire mark cutting diagonally across my lawn. Maybe a delivery driver took a wrong turn. Maybe someone was avoiding a pothole. I brushed it off, but over the next week, I began to see a pattern. Every morning, around 7:45, a silver SUV would roll up the street. Instead of turning into her own driveway, my neighbor Karen would drive straight over my grass, cutting across it to reach the side street behind our houses. She'd slow just enough to make the turn, but not enough to stop tearing up the turf. At first, I thought there might be a reason. Maybe her driveway was blocked. Maybe she had an emergency. But no, she simply decided my property was her shortcut to avoid waiting for traffic at the main road. It was pure convenience at my expense. The lawn wasn't just some patch of grass to me. I had spent years nurturing it, reseeding in the fall, aerating in the spring, carefully fertilizing so it stayed lush and green. The HOA had strict rules about lawn care, and I had always kept mine in perfect condition. Now, each day brought deeper ruts and crushed soil. I decided to confront her, but in true Karen fashion, she brushed me off with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "It's just grass," she said, as if that made it okay. She claimed she was in a rush in the mornings, and cutting across my yard saved her a ton of time. She even hinted that I should be a good neighbor and not make a big deal about it. I tried the polite route. I installed small garden stakes along the edge of my yard. Within 2 days, 3 of them had been knocked over, snapped in half like twigs. I placed large flower pots near the area she drove through. By the end of the week, one was shattered in the middle of the lawn, the soil scattered like she had driven straight through it without slowing down. It wasn't just the physical damage. It was a sheer disrespect. The knowledge that she knew it was wrong and did it anyway. She didn't care about my effort, my time, or my property. And because she was friendly with the HOA president, I knew complaining officially would probably go nowhere. So I started to think differently. This wasn't just about stopping her. This was about making sure she never even thought about doing it again. I wasn't going to block her path with flimsy stakes or potted plants. I was going to end the shortcut problem once and for all. But to do that, I'd have to get creative. I began researching property lines, HOA bylaws, and local ordinances. I measured the exact spot where she entered my yard. I studied aerial maps and even considered planting a line of thorn bushes. But plants take time to grow. I needed something immediate, something that would work the very next morning. That's when I stumbled upon a solution most people would never think of. A device usually reserved for commercial parking lots and private roads, something designed to keep trespassers out. The more I read about it, the more I realized it was exactly what I needed. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't against HOA rules. And yet, it was absolutely devastating to anyone who ignored it. The idea started to take shape in my head, and I knew Karen's shortcut days were numbered. Once I decided on the solution, my mind couldn't focus on anything else. I spent hours researching models, installation methods, and legality. These devices went by different names: tire spikes, one-way traffic control strips, or in my case, a retractable tire shredding gate. They were designed so that vehicles could pass over them in one direction safely, but going the wrong way would leave the tires in tatters. It wasn't cheap. The good quality models were built from steel, meant for heavy use and weather-resistant. They weren't the sort of thing you'd find at a local hardware store. But I found a manufacturer who sold to private landowners, and more importantly, they shipped discreetly. I placed the order and paid extra for rush delivery. While I waited, I began preparing the site. Every morning, I'd watch from my window as Karen's SUV carved its diagonal path across my grass. She didn't even try to avoid the existing ruts anymore. She just followed them like a worn trail. Each pass made her route easier to spot. I marked the entry point with a thin rope, acting like I was measuring for landscaping if anyone asked. I knew I couldn't just drop the spikes in without planning. The key was to make them blend in, to appear as part of the ground until it was too late for her to stop. I dug a shallow trench where her front tires always crossed. The soil that was already packed hard from her repeated trespassing, which made it easier to work without leaving obvious signs of digging. The day the package arrived, I felt a strange mix of excitement and caution. The crate was heavier than I expected, but inside was a gleaming set of steel teeth, hinged and spring-loaded. I ran my hand over the mechanism. It was solid, industrial grade, and looked like it could tear through a truck's tires in seconds. Before installing it, I triple-checked the property boundaries. The device had to be 100% on my land, leaving no room for dispute. I even took photos with time-stamped GPS data to prove where it was placed. I wasn't just setting up a deterrent. I was building my legal defense in case she tried to fight back. By nightfall, the trench was complete. I lowered the tire shredding gate into place and secured it with bolts sunk deep into the ground. I packed the edges with fresh dirt and grass seed so it blended naturally. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a slightly raised strip of ground. The next morning was the real test. I didn't want to be outside when it happened. I didn't want to make eye contact or gloat. I wanted her to think it was just bad luck, an accident she brought entirely on herself. So I waited inside, pretending to sip coffee while my eyes stayed locked on the window. At exactly 7:45, her silver SUV came into view. She was on autopilot, the same way someone drives a familiar route without thinking. Her front tires reached the spot, and in a flash, the steel teeth did their job. I heard it before I saw it. The rapid, muffled thumping of air escaping rubber, the grinding sound of metal against rubber and steel. Her SUV jerked violently, the front end dipping as both tires went flat almost instantly. She slammed on the brakes and got out, staring at the shredded mess where her front tires used to be. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding with a strange satisfaction. She looked around, scanning for witnesses, but there was no one. The best part? She had to call a tow truck from the very spot she had been using to save herself 2 minutes of driving time. And that was just the beginning. Karen didn't just take the tire damage as a personal slight. She treated it as a declaration of war. Within hours of the tow truck hauling her crippled SUV away, she was marching door to door, telling every neighbor who would listen that I had set a trap for her. She twisted the story, painting herself as the victim of an unprovoked attack. She left out the part where she had been trespassing on my property every single day for weeks. By that evening, the first HOA letter appeared in my mailbox. The president, who happened to be one of Karen's close friends, accused me of installing a hazardous device that posed a risk to residents and visitors. They demanded immediate removal or face escalating fines. They also claimed I was in violation of a vague rule about maintaining the neighborhood's safety standards. That rule was one of those broad, catch-all clauses HOAs love to use when they want to control something they don't explicitly regulate. The problem for them was simple. I had done my homework. The gate was fully on my property, clearly within the boundaries. It wasn't electrified. It wasn't hidden in a way that could injure pedestrians, and most importantly, it only damaged vehicles entering from an illegal direction. From a legal standpoint, it was no different than having a locked, spiked gate on a private driveway. Still, the HOA kept pushing. They scheduled an emergency board meeting to discuss the threat I had allegedly created. I received another letter demanding I attend, which I declined. I knew that showing up would only give Karen and her friends an audience to grandstand for. Instead, I sent them a packet of documents. The packet contained everything. Photos of the tire marks across my lawn, timestamps of every morning she cut through, GPS-tagged property line maps, and the receipts of the damage she had caused. I even included the HOA's own guidelines showing that property owners were responsible for protecting their land from trespassers. That move didn't just stall their attack. It forced them into silence, at least temporarily. But silence didn't mean peace. Karen didn't stop. If anything, she escalated. She started parking her replacement rental car on the street directly in front of my house. She would idle there for minutes at a time, glaring at my front windows. She complained to the county about unauthorized construction on my property. An inspector came, looked at the tire gate, and left without issuing any violation. When that failed, she tried a different tactic: public humiliation. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, accusing me of being a danger to children and creating a hostile environment. It was a kind of post designed to stir panic. Even though my device posed no risk to anyone walking or biking by, some neighbors bought into her version. Others quietly reached out to me, telling me they'd had their own run-ins with her over the years. I learned I wasn't the first target of her entitled behavior, just the first who had hit back hard enough to make it stick. The HOA was clearly torn. They didn't want to publicly back Karen too aggressively in case my legal defense held up, but they also didn't want to set a precedent that homeowners could install deterrents without their approval. That left us in a tense stalemate. But I knew Karen wouldn't let the matter rest. She wasn't the type to back down, even when she was wrong. And that meant the real battle was still ahead. What I didn't realize was just how far she'd be willing to go, and how much she'd end up regretting it. Got it. Here's Chapter 4, the final chapter Karen cut through my yard for parking. So I installed a tire-shredding gate. Chapter 4, the final backfire. Karen's obsession with winning had reached a breaking point. Weeks had passed since her tires met my gate, but instead of letting the matter go, she doubled down. She had tried HOA pressure, county complaints, and public shaming, all without success. Now, she was ready to take a more dangerous route. One early morning, before the sun had fully risen, I heard faint metallic clinking coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just a trash pickup, but when I peeked through the blinds, I saw her, hood up on her sweatshirt, crouched low, working on the bolts of my tire-shredding gate with what looked like a cordless impact wrench. She was trying to remove it herself. What she hadn't counted on was that I had anticipated this. The bolts were not just deep-set. They were reinforced with tamper-proof fasteners designed for high-security installations. Worse for her, my security cameras, hidden in plain sight as yard lights, were recording every second in high definition. I didn't go outside to stop her. I didn't yell. I didn't call her name. I simply called a non-emergency police line, explained that a neighbor was on my property attempting to dismantle and remove private equipment, and provided live camera footage. The officers arrived quietly, catching her still struggling with the bolts. When they confronted her, she tried to spin her usual story, that the device was illegal, that she was removing a hazard. The officers didn't buy it. They reviewed my footage, verified the property boundaries I had already filed, and took her statement. She wasn't arrested that day, but she did receive a trespassing citation and a formal warning. For Karen, that was worse than a fine. It was a documented stain on her record, proof she was a problem. The fallout was immediate. Word spread to the neighborhood faster than ever. But this time, the story was different. Now, people were talking about how she had been caught red-handed, trying to sabotage a neighbor's property. Even her few remaining allies in the HOA began distancing themselves. The HOA, sensing public opinion shift, sent me a final letter, not demanding removal of the gate, but recommending that I consider replacing it with landscaping when practical. I kept the letter for my records, but never responded. The gate stayed exactly where it was. From that day forward, Karen never cut through my yard again. She avoided even walking on the sidewalk in front of my house, taking the long way around whenever she had to leave. Her glares in the driver's seat of her SUV became rare, and eventually, she stopped making eye contact altogether. In the end, I didn't just stop her from trespassing. I made it clear that disrespect had consequences, that property lines are more than just invisible borders. They're boundaries of respect.